I just want to take a moment to reintroduce myself. My name is Mary Grzenia, and I'm the DRE here at St. Anne's. So I'm the Director of Faith Formation or Religious Education. And I do a number of things aside from teaching and organizing the catechists. I've come and spoken to the confirmation class, but I'm just here in a ministerial role day in and day out for the most part, and I get to work with Rich, which is really exciting. So tonight I want to talk to you a little bit about someone who isn't a saint yet, but I hope and pray becomes a saint one day. How many of you have heard of Saint Maria Goretti? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you a little about Maria Goretti, Saint Maria Goretti, because her story is obviously, in a very obvious manner, interwoven with the person I'm going to speak to you about tonight. So if you don't know, Saint Maria Goretti was murdered at the age of, I believe it was 13 or 14 years old. I think between 12 and 14. I can't remember her exact age, but she was quite young. And I'm actually going to be speaking to you about her murderer. Like, what? Wait, this person is going to be a saint maybe, but they were a murderer? I'm really confused. Okay, so stick with me. Alessandro Serenelli was the name of the young man who murdered Saint Maria Goretti. And he was born the son of a very poor Italian farmer in the late 1800s. Now, when Alessandro was quite young, just a few months old, his mother tried to drown him. She attempted to drown him and kill him. She was later sent to, she was unsuccessful, obviously, and she was later sent to a mental institution or an asylum. He didn't really see her again. His older brother also was committed to a mental institution. And so he was left alone with a poor farmer of a father who was also an alcoholic. He didn't have a great childhood, to put it lightly. He had a very tragic childhood. So he was alone, he was motherless, and in the care of an alcoholic father who was just trying to make ends meet. So the depth of isolation and pain and loneliness and the agony of feeling unwanted and eventually probably finding out and knowing that your mother tried to murder you and kill you haunted Alessandro like it would haunt any of us. The cards were totally stacked against him. And to add to that miserable list of circumstances, he was poor, very, very poor. And his father was very frequently unemployed. So flash forward to Alessandro's late teen years. His father eventually did secure a job in a kind of a farming community. And they moved to this farming community, and they became neighbors with the Goretti family. And it was roughly around this time that Alessandro began to discover the escape of sexual impurity. He began to cultivate these feelings of lust by turning to pornographic images and media, and believe it or not, porn did exist in the early 1900s. It's been around basically since the beginning of time in one form or another. And Alessandro fell prey to it because he was lonely. He didn't have a friendship, and he didn't have a father who could be an actual father to him and be a leader to him and show him how to be an authentic man. So Alessandro turned to these things. And then he began to befriend his next door neighbor, Maria. And not just befriend her, but stalk her in a sense. And he began to build up all these lustful feelings towards her. And Maria was a very innocent young girl. And she resisted his attractions. She resisted his lewd conversation that he would try to have with her. She would say, "No, that's wrong. I don't want to do that. What are you talking about? Leave me alone." And she just went about her day-to-day life, was a very prayerful woman. And Alessandro became very frustrated with the fact that Maria wanted nothing to do with him. So he mapped out this plan that one day when everybody was working in the fields, and he was supposed to be working in the fields as well, he would sneak back to the house where Maria was, and he would rape her and take her by force. He shows up that afternoon, Maria is alone. I believe she was alone with the exception of maybe a 1 or 2 year old sibling that she was looking after for the day. And Alessandro went after her and attacked her violently. But he underestimated how ferocious Maria was and how she wanted to protect her innocence and protect her purity. And she told him, no, this is a sin. You cannot do this. I don't want you to go to hell. I don't want you to condemn your immortal soul. And when he tried to choke her and lay his hands on her again, she pushed him off of her, and that's when he flew into a complete rage. And he took something, it's called a metal file, and it's a long, somewhat sharp instrument that's used to actually file metal. And he took that, and he stabbed Maria 14 times. He stabbed her 14 times, and we would all think that she would be dead within minutes, right? Maria lived for 24 hours with these agonizing injuries, these incredible stab wounds. In fact, it's said that the file at one point entered her from her front and actually hit her spine, and it bent the metal file. But she lived, and she was conscious enough during that time where doctors and medical staff, when she was rushed to the hospital, and even her family who was gathered around her, could attest to the fact that Maria was praying for Alessandro the entire time she was going through this agony. When she was dying, she said, Lord Jesus, have mercy on Alessandro. Have mercy on him. I pray, please have mercy on him. Alessandro was arrested, and he was taken to prison, and Maria, as we know, died of her injuries. Alessandro was sentenced to 30 years in prison, not a lifelong sentence because, interestingly enough, at that time, if you were under the age of 21, you were considered a minor. And so he was charged as a minor, and he only had 30 years to live out in prison. But Alessandro during that time was completely unrepentant. He was angry. In fact, they had to keep him away and totally isolated from the other prisoners because he would go off on them and he would have brutal attacks on the other prisoners. So he was kept in isolation even in prison. There's actually a story, an account of a priest coming to visit Alessandro and asking him if he wanted him to hear Alessandro's confession. And Alessandro spat on that priest and flew off at him and got angry, and the priest, I think, was removed by guards or fled because he was so terrified of Alessandro's wrath. So he lived out his first 6 years in prison, angry, unrepentant, and in fact blaming for Maria for what had happened to her, for what he had done to her. Until one night, by the grace of God, Alessandro had a vision. And in this vision, Maria was radiant. He saw this young girl that he had killed in cold blood, radiant, almost angelic, picking flowers in a garden. And not just any flowers, but white lilies. 14 of them to be exact. And she was coming up to Alessandro and laying them one by one at his feet. When Alessandro awoke from this vision, he realized that each of those white lilies, which are a symbol of purity, were for the stab wounds he had inflicted upon her. And he was completely awestruck and mesmerized by this vision, and realizing that it was a heavenly vision of mercy and love and forgiveness sent to him from the Father. And he immediately called for a priest. Immediately wanted the sacrament of confession. Years of rage and blame and shame and guilt and hate and lust poured out of Alessandro in the sacrament of reconciliation. And you know what? After that moment, he lived out the rest of his prison sentence and was actually released 3 years early because he was so peaceful and so contrite completely changed by this heavenly vision. It wasn't a dream, okay? This was a heavenly vision. It wasn't just like something that, you would normally go to sleep at night and wake up from. This was directly from the Father. And so he lived out his prison sentence, sorry, contrite, but peaceful, resting in the peace of forgiveness, knowing he'd been forgiven in the sacrament of reconciliation. And after he was released, he went, the very first thing that he did, he went to Maria's mother, Assunta, and knelt down on her doorstep and begged her forgiveness. And Assunta, if this was us, if this was me, I don't know what I would do, but I'm pretty sure I would not do what she did, was pick him up off of his knees and embraced him and said, my son, I forgive you because Maria's forgiveness was so great. And the next day, they attended Christmas Day Mass together. Alessandro eventually joined the Franciscan Capuchins in a small town in Italy as a lay person. So he joined their community, but he didn't take any vows. He just lived among them as a gardener and as a general laborer and spent the rest of his years doing that. Eventually, the story of Maria and her mercy and her love and her prayers for Alessandro surfaced and reached the ears of the Vatican and of the Pope, and Maria Goretti was eventually canonized. She was made a saint. And Alessandro, there's not completely confirmed, but we're led to believe that Alessandro was there at St. Peter's in the Vatican the day she was canonized. Now, I share this story with you because it's shocking, it's tragic, it's awe-inspiring in so many ways. But I think because we can all relate in some way or another to Alessandro. Hopefully no one here has committed the grave evil of murder, right? But at some level, we can all relate to Alessandro. And here's why. I think because Alessandro, and the reasons Alessandro was so unrepentant and so hateful toward the church, toward priests, toward the sacrament of reconciliation, to anything having to do with love and mercy and forgiveness, is because he knew he had done wrong and he knew the church was right. And he knew Maria was right and he couldn't bear it. How many times do we stay away from those that love us and want to forgive us because we are so filled with shame? But something otherworldly, like a vision or a friend reaching out to us and saying, hey, I love you, I forgive you. You need to step out of this shame and you need to do something about it. You need to give it up and give it over. That's what we need. And all of us have experienced that before, and we stay away from things that are good for us and we turn to things that are bad for us because we live in this fear. I want to read to you a letter that Alessandro actually crafted right before he died. And it's kind of his testimony, and it's very brief and it's very simple. He says, I am now almost 80 years old. I am close to the end of my days. Looking back at my past, I recognize that in my early youth, I followed a false road, an evil path that led to my ruin. Through the content of printed magazines, immoral shows, and bad examples in the media, I saw the majority of the young people of my day following evil without even thinking twice. Unworried, I did the same thing. There were faithful and practicing Christian believers around me, but I paid no attention to them. I was blinded by a brute impulse that pushed me down the wrong way of living. At the age of 20, I committed a crime of passion, the memory of which still horrifies me today. Maria Goretti, now a saint, was my good angel whom God placed in my path to save me. Her words both of rebuke and forgiveness are still imprinted in my heart. She prayed for me, interceding for her killer. 30 years in prison followed. If I had not been a minor in Italian law, I would have been sentenced to life in prison. Nevertheless, I accepted the sentence I received as something I deserved. Resigned, I atoned for my sin. Little Maria was truly my light, my protectress. With her help, I served those 27 years in prison well. When society accepted me back among its members, I tried to live honestly. With angelic charity, the Sons of St. Francis, the minor Capuchins of the Marches, welcomed me among them, not as a servant, but as a brother. I have lived with them for 24 years. Now I look serenely to the time in which I will be admitted to the vision of God, to embrace my dear ones once again, and to be close to my guardian angel, Maria Goretti, and her dear mother, Assunta. May all who read this letter of mine desire to follow the blessed teaching of avoiding evil and following the good. May all believe with the faith of little children that religion with its precepts is not something one can do without. Rather, it is true comfort and the only sure way in all of life's circumstances, even in the most painful. Peace and all good, Alessandro Serenelli. I love the way he opens that letter. I recognize that in my early youth, I followed a false road. He doesn't talk about his tragic past or his violent history or his mother who was committed to a mental institution or losing his brother to the same fate or a father who was an alcoholic and lazy and couldn't keep work. He doesn't mention any of those things. He doesn't blame any of those things for what he did. He accepts them. He takes responsibility. And how many of us don't think twice about the path that we're on? We don't think twice. We just keep moving forward, moving along, engaging in things that aren't good for us, that hurt us, that aren't going to benefit us at all in the long run. And then I love what he says at the end, a man who despised the church and despised the mercy that it offered and the teachings that it proclaims, and says that religion with its precepts is not something one can do without. The commandments, the church teachings, we can't live without them. If we try to live without them, we're going to live lives that are shallow and empty and vacant. And those rules keep us on a path that lead to freedom. And he recognized that. He said there's things, there's church teachings that allow us to actually be more free than we ever thought we could be. Alessandro's particular crutch was pornography, which is something so many people struggle with. It's unbelievable, and people don't talk about it. But people lead secret lives and have secret addictions and secret crutches, and whether it's porn or something else, drugs, money, materialism, gossip, social media, we all have those things in one capacity or another. And Alessandro turned to porn because he didn't know how to feel love. He didn't experience real love in his life from his family, from friends. And so in order to escape the reality of his loneliness, he engaged in something that offered false hope and empty promises. And we all have those things that we fear, right? Abandonment, rejection, loss or lack of love, or that we're not good enough. I think for Alessandro, his message at the beginning of his life is that he felt like he was not good enough. And I'm sure if I asked people to raise their hands and ask if you've ever felt like that, the whole room, everybody's hands would shoot up. But I'm not going to ask you to do that, right? Because we don't want people to know we feel that way, right? That we're not good enough. But I think that's his tale. That's his story, that we're not good enough. And we all feel this, like I said, on some level, one way or the other, whether we're 13 or 33 or 93. And it might be very small, and it might be a little lie that creeps in here and there, but we all do. And I want to tell you why, so you understand the origin of this lie, and you can reject it and live your life in freedom, like Alessandro discovered. Okay, and we have to go all the way back to the beginning. We have to go back to Genesis, to the creation of man and woman, because this has been affecting us since the beginning. And God did not have this as our destiny, this feeling of not good enough or this lack or this loss, because Adam and Eve were completely equipped with beautiful sanctifying grace. They had this original state of holiness. They really lacked for nothing. But the devil had other plans. And he told Eve, God knows well that when you eat of it, the fruit, your eyes will be opened and you will be like gods who know good and evil. Like gods. not accepting or embracing everything that God has given, but grasping and reaching to be like God. Not to just accept all of the graces and goodness he wants us to have and that he offers us. So the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and she could eat it, and pleasing to the eyes, and the tree was desirable for gaining wisdom. So she took some of its fruit and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Now we all know this story. We've heard this story since we were in preschool CCD, right? And we all think it's, they ate an apple and that's what happened, and boom, now we're in trouble. That's not it, you guys. It wasn't actually consuming the apple. It's what it represents. Think about this. Eve grasped and reached for something that God was actually freely giving her. All this grace, all this goodness, all this love, all this mercy, an abundance all around them. And yet she still felt good enough because she did not feel good enough because Satan planted that seed of doubt in her heart. And that's the fall. Doubting God's goodness and trying to be like him instead of accepting all of it graciously. And Eve often gets a bad rap, which she should, right? Because she messed up. But Adam also messed up. Because listen to that. Who was with her? We all think Adam was off petting horses and like planting things and eating and like laying out and sunbathing. Adam was right next to her, you guys. He stood there and he watched her reach for that fruit. And Adam didn't do anything to stop it. So a hole punctures us as human beings, and we have that original sin, which, by the grace of God, is erased with baptism, but we still bear some of those wounds. Women, for us, often we do not feel special or beautiful, that we are not worth it, that we're not worth real love, and that we have to accept counterfeits and false love and false affection, and we have to give people things that we think they want so that they'll like us, or dress a certain way so that they'll like us, or tweet one thing so that they'll like us. So we often do not feel special or worth it. And men, my heart aches for you, young men, because you are told that you are not strong, that you can't stand up, that you can't protect what is noble and what is good, that you don't have what it takes to be strong and to be a real man. You don't have what it takes. So women, we are not special, and men, you don't have what it takes. And that's the lie that Satan planted in the hearts of Adam and Eve. So we turn to things to fill us up, to fill up that hole that punctured our humanity, right? Porn, drugs, social media, gossip, all the things I mentioned, right? Materialism. But Alessandro, when he had that vision, he turned to something that really and truly would fill him up. The grace of God. Sanctifying grace regained in the sacrament of reconciliation. He turned to Assunta, Maria's mother, for forgiveness, humility, the courage that took. To get down on his knees and beg her for forgiveness. Maybe expecting her to slap him, to yell at him, to call the authorities to drag him away and leave her alone. But he turned to her, and that broke her heart. Even if it had a fragment of hate towards him, it broke her, the sight of him on his knees. He was filled up by the Capuchin friars who took him in and gave him a community and a place to be and a place to call home when he was homeless. Do you see? You have to turn to the things that really and truly fill you up, that actually allow your wounds to be healed. Because the other things, the addictions, the false friendships, letting that lie build up that you are not good enough and that you don't have what it takes, it widens that hole, you guys, and it leaves you more empty than you were before. And I think that's what Alessandro has to share with us. And I pray that he is in heaven interceding for all young men and all young women and their purity, and that they can fight that lie that they are not special and that they are not good enough. Because you all are. You're made in God's image. You are loved. And his mercy for you is untold. The devil said in the garden, you are not good enough. This will make you good enough. This thing and that thing and the other thing. I want to leave you with this. Christ says, I see your lack and I love you. I see your fear, your deepest fears, maybe fears you don't even recognize or realize, and I love you. I see your misdeeds and your sins and your failings and your wounds and the places that you're hurt, but you don't want to talk about them. And I died for you. I died for you. And I die for you again. So I see it, even if you don't, and you don't want to own it. Because in my eyes, you are good. And it is good that you exist. And you are so loved, and you are deserving of all my mercy. So I encourage you to ask Alessandro for his intercession. And maybe someday he'll be beatified and be on his way to canonization. And ask Maria Goretti. I didn't mean to throw her into the shadows, but she gets a lot of I got a lot of talk, right? And she's very popular, and she's a beautiful saint. But I ask that you turn to him in your time of need, in that time of I'm not good enough. But ultimately, turn to Christ, who would die for you again tomorrow. Because you are good, and you are beautiful, and you are special, and you have what it takes. God bless you guys. I love you guys.
God, I'm weak. God, I'm scared. God, I don't